And this has been truly enriching. I think it's the treasure trove of information that not many people have access to. So, I mean, I were to specialize in, let's say, Mandarin, then or Arabic. So those languages might take a little more time than French or German. So how does it work for them? UPSC toppers per se, top one, two, three, four, fifth rank toppers. Why aren't they opting for the foreign services, and why are they preferring the IAS or the IPS? The Indian Foreign Service is the diplomatic service and essential civil services of the Government of India under the Ministry of External Affairs. The Foreign Secretary of India is the head of the services. Post retirement, Indian Foreign Service officers have held high offices, including that of the President of India, K.R. Narayanan, Vice President of India, Muhammad Hamid Ansari, Speaker of Lok Sabha, Meera Kumari, and various cabinet ministers such as Hardeep Singh Puri, and also the incumbent Minister of External Affairs, Subramaniam Jaishankar. Before 1948, some of the diplomats were appointed directly by the Prime Minister of India and included the former native rulers of India who had integrated their provinces into India. It was only from 1948 onwards the IFS officers were recruited directly based on the civil services exam conducted by the UPSC. In the first episode of the Money Heist podcast, we talk about the career in the Indian Foreign Services. To all the new heisters, Money Heist podcast will cover my contrarian philosophy on money, life, and career. I hope you enjoy the first episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Money Heist. And the first guest for the podcast is a dear friend of mine, Prathit, who is a member of the India's Foreign Services and worked across the Caribbean, Germany, and is currently based in DC. So thank you so much, Prathit, for taking out the time.
No. Thank you, Naman, for inviting me, and I'm very happy that you are kickstarting the series Money Heist. And I'm even more grateful and even more happy that you've invited me as the first guest this series. So I'm very much looking forward to interacting with you and your audience and sharing my experiences and looking forward to a fruitful discussion.
Wonderful. So a few days ago, Prathit, I wrote a newsletter, and approximately 20,000 subscribers, folks have subscribed to the newsletter and call it Money Heist. I have no reason why I call it Money Heist, but I just went with the flow. And the idea is simple. The day and age that we live in, youngsters want to become rich very early. They want to invest in stocks. They want to invest in public markets or in private markets and gain exponential returns. But the idea of Money Heist is a little different. So it's the best way to wealth generation is about investing in skill sets, investing in experiences, and investing in relationships. And one profession that has always excited me is the profession of the foreign services, where you truly live the experiences across cultures, across geographies. You forge wonderful relationships, not just with the nation states, but also with the wonderful people in various regions across the states. And you also end up developing multiple skill sets in the journey. And therefore, I thought it's a no-brainer to have you in the podcast. And I'm so delighted that you agreed. And I look forward to an enriching conversation without the wine that I had requested, but you chose to not bring in. So tell me a journey. Who is Prathit? And what's your story so far?
Okay, so to begin, I would say Prathit or is small town boy like most of us back in India. I am from a city called Allahabad, now called Prayagraj, and I have been born there, brought up there. I have studied in a convent school there, but the city is not like a metro city, and it's not like a small town. So it's a city of around 1.5 million population, very well connected, but it has that rural feel also, because as you go out of the city you have like the rural India, while as I said it is also very connected to the urban centers of the country. So I got an exposure to both sides of India, as we call it, the urban India and the rural India. So I grew up in that environment, but I did not travel a lot. I stayed in Uttar Pradesh. I stayed in my city for most of my time. And I think that molded me a lot, because I find that my experience during my first 18 years or 20 years in Allahabad has prepared me to interact with a wide array of people, whether it be in cities or in villages or from different tribes, even when I'm living outside India. So I think that experience enriches me and helps me in that regard also. Cut to the chase, I did my schooling in Allahabad. Then I basically joined B-Tech because I just went with the flow like other colleagues or students or friends. And then I dropped out of engineering after 6 months. So I joined NIT Bhopal, civil engineering. And then I joined a BA at University of Allahabad and did my law degree at University of Allahabad. But it was during my time at the University of Allahabad that I came in contact with political science. Political science was one of my subjects. And the MEA, which is the Ministry of External Affairs, it runs a series called Distinguished Lecture Series in which retired Indian diplomats go to these different universities, the political science departments and the IR departments, and take lectures on foreign policy and India's relationship with the world and interacting. That is where I got inspired, and I thought that if I'm going into government service, it has to be the foreign service. So unlike a lot of people who fill like the UPSC form, thinking to go into any service, preferably the administrative service or the police service where you wield a lot of power. My motivation to fill that UPSC form from day one was to enter the Indian Foreign Service. And I was lucky that I could do so in a couple of years. After that, you go along with everybody to Labasna, which is in Mussoorie, where you get trained together. After that, you get trained for a while in Delhi. And then I was posted to Berlin for a year and a half, where I had to learn the German language, while also work at the Embassy of India in Berlin, learning the tricks of the trade. And they transfer you to different divisions or different desks so that you get like an overall view of how an embassy functions. After that, I was posted for 2 years and a half at the High Commission of India in Jamaica, where we have a small mission there, and I was the head of chancery there. I also did political work. So this has been my journey. After that time, I thought that I was maybe getting a little offbeat, and I had always thought that I should get a professional degree in foreign service at some point in my life. And I was thinking that the earlier the better, and the more like time elapses, it would be difficult to go back into academics. So I took my study leave. And I joined the Georgetown University for pursuing this master's in international relations. So this is
that's amazing. Against all the advice and against all the nudges, Prathit decided to not join Fletcher or Harvard. He chose Georgetown, one of our competitors. But Prathit, your story is extremely fascinating. You know, you grew up in Uttar Pradesh, you studied in Madhya Pradesh, and this is the region of India that is spellbound by the power and perks and privileges of an IAS officer or IPS officer. So why didn't you choose the IAS or the IPS, and what excited or motivated you to join the foreign services?
Okay, so let's just say that the pull of foreign service was more than all the other factors of being in the Hindi heartland and being like getting all those voices that you need to. If you get a chance to go into the government service, you must go to the administrative or the police service. So for me, I had never thought about going into government service. Had that been my first motivation, maybe I would have thought of administrative or the police service as my first option. When I thought, my first love was with the international relations or with foreign policy. And that is when I started exploring how to make a career out of it. And that is how I came in, got to know about the Indian Foreign Service. And then the UPSC, because I got to know that if you got to get into foreign service, you have to go to UPSC, and that's how I started preparing. For most of the people, it is the other way around. They need a job, a government job, and they need to get into IAS and IPS, and then they get into UPSC. For me, it was foreign policy, Indian Foreign Service, and therefore UPSC. So it was, if you can say, the other way around. And and the charm of the Indian Foreign Service, as I said, those lectures by retired ambassadors and diplomats at the University of Allahabad, that just sucked me in.
Any specific lecture that you remember and others could benefit from it?
So there was one lecture by Ambassador Bhashwati Mukherjee, who was India's retired India's ambassador to the Netherlands. And she came to the university, to the political science department, and she talked about India's foreign policy approach towards Europe. Because she was a Europe specialist, and I got to interact with her even after the lecture because I was also part of the administrative, like I was helping in the logistical part also.
Yeah.
So I spent time with her for 2 days. I got a lot of time with her. I spoke to her, and that sort of influenced me because she told me about how the MEA functions, how we have different divisions, how you can specialize in a division, how you work in an embassy, what's the life of a diplomat. And so there was no looking back after that. Another incident was Afghani ambassador to India. He visited Allahabad.
Okay.
So and the University of Allahabad. So as I told you, I had remained in Allahabad for most of my time. So unlike like people or students studying in Delhi University or maybe in the JNU, where they on and off rub shoulders with diplomats because they keep coming to the universities or to think tanks or to open public events where they can see them in person, interact with them. For me, as an enthusiast in foreign policy, international relations, to see an actual ambassador of a different country coming to the university was a big thing. These are like two specific instances, but obviously, because this distinguished lecture series was something in which a retired diplomat came almost every month or every 2 months. So it was like a continuous process of influence, and that is why I chose to join the foreign service.
Wow, that's amazing. So I have this genuine question from you that there was an era, in 80s and 90s, and even I think the early phases of 2000, that the IFS was the preferred choice of services amongst all the UPSC toppers. There's a very famous story of, I think, Kapil Sibal, whose elder brother, Kamal Sibal, was also in the IFS. He retired as the Foreign Secretary of India. And when Kapil Sibal appeared for UPSC, his first choice was the foreign services, but unfortunately he got into the IAS and later on chose to not pursue it. The same is the case with one of my dear friends, Sumit Seth. I'm not sure if you know him. Sumit
was obviously
he was a deputy. Wow. So even Sumit, when he appeared for UPSC, IFS was the only choice. And and he ended up clearing and becoming an IFS officer, a wonderful IFS officer for India. But this trend has changed in the past few years. What could be the reason? Why are the UPSC toppers per se, top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th rank toppers, why aren't they opting for the foreign services, and why are they preferring the IAS or the IPS over the foreign services? What could be the reason?
Okay, so a couple of points. Obviously, I have heard the same stories that during the 70s, and obviously, these are not just stories. The 70s, 80s, 90s were the times when foreign service used to just fill up in the first 20 or 30, like the people who were selected had the first 20, 30 ranks, just filled up the foreign service, and then seats for the administrative services started filling up. But I think the change in trend has a lot to do with India's liberalization after 1990s, 91, because before that, there was also a feeling that if you wanted a good life, it could only be had abroad, or let's just say that the life abroad, the quality of life abroad is incomparable to anything that you could do in India. However, after liberalization, with the economy growing, with the standard of life getting better, even though the people in IS and IPS did lead good quality of life even before the 1990s, but the whole picture of India as a place to stay became more attractive. So I think this is one reason why a lot of people choose now to stay back in India rather than just thinking that you could have a very good quality of life for yourself and your family abroad. Another reason would be that the base from which the civil servants come, that has become much more broad-based in the last 20 years than it was before. So when a person from Uttar Pradesh or maybe an interior region from Bihar fills up the form, his urge is somewhere to maybe come back to Bihar or to UP and work for his or her people. While foreign service can seem like a distant leap of faith, and maybe he or she cannot connect how working there would directly benefit his village or his district or his state. So this could be one of the reasons. But another practical reason is that before the 1990s, the number of seats that we had in foreign service was like 9, 10, sometimes 7 or 5. However, the number of seats now, my batch was 39 people. And the batches are between 25 to 40.
Which is still minuscule.
which is still minuscule, but comparatively like 3 or 4 times than the batches that we had in before 1990s. So, or even in 2000s, I think the batches were sometimes 9 or 11. So when you have more seats to fill up, obviously the ranks till which they would be filled would go maybe after 100 or some things like that. However, for example, I can give you an example from my batch. The second ranker took foreign service. The ninth ranker took foreign service, 11th, 13th, 15th, 23rd, 26th. So it's not that people are not taking foreign service. People who specifically want to go into the foreign service, and I think it's good. People who actually have like a motivation to go into foreign service, whether they are at the top or maybe in the middle ranks, are still going into foreign service. So I think it's a good differentiation. But there are all sorts of reasons.
I really like your point about the exposure effect sort of a thing, that everyone in the rural towns and in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, they know what a collector does or what an SP does, but they have no idea what is the job of a head of chancery or the second secretary or the first secretary. And that could perhaps be the reason, because they have no exposure to it. So if you were to talk about your time in the foreign services, let's start with the CFL. What is CFL? And which one did you choose and why, and how is this allocation happens? And later on, we'll talk more about your time in Jamaica and your journey in the as a second secretary.
Okay. After you get selected into foreign service, as I told you earlier, you get 3.5 years of training in Mussoorie at Labasna, which is the Lahal Bahadur Center for Administrative Service. After that, you come to Delhi. We have the Sushma Swaraj Indian Foreign Service Institute, which is very near to JNU. The campus is called the old JNU campus, where you get trained for about 6 to 7 months. You have all sorts of lectures from people in the Ministry of External Affairs, retired ambassadors, diplomats, even ambassadors from different countries come and speak to you. People from the academic field, JNU is very close. And after that, you get attached to the ministry for a couple of months, sometimes more than 3 or 4 months, where you get assigned to a specific division. So, for example, I worked in the Western Europe division for 2 months. So you get an exposure of how the ministry works. After that, you get posted to a country where you have to learn one language, one foreign language, and you have to pass an examination before being confirmed in the foreign service. So the way it goes is there is a list of languages and the number of seats allocated to each language that comes out once you while you are in Delhi, while you are in training. And then you have to give your first preference, second preference, third preference, like you do in UPSC with the services. And depending on your standing in the service, you get allocated a language. So I chose German. And I went to Germany. And what happens once you join the embassy there, you are completely part of the embassy. You are called a third secretary, which is equivalent of a second secretary, but it just denotes that you are still not confirmed in the service.
Got it. So what would be the equivalent of a third secretary in the IAS and the IPS?
It would be under secretary. It would be under secretary. Under secretary. So third secretary, second secretary would be an under secretary in Delhi.
Okay, got it.
Once you are there, what happens is that you get enrolled in a language institute. So, for example, the Institute for German Language is the Goethe Institute in Berlin. So, me and my colleague Neeraj, we were both posted in Berlin. We used to go in the morning to the Goethe Institute, learn German for 3 hours, and return before lunch to the embassy. After lunch, we worked at the embassy for till the evening. So this is how our schedules were, and after 1.5 years, you take the examination, you pass it, and then you are confirmed in the service. So after that, you work full time at them. So you are like a full time foreign service officer.
So I mean, I were to specialize in, let's say, Mandarin, then or Arabic. So those languages might take a little more time than French or German. So how does it work for them in terms of promotion aspects and so on and so forth?
So there are different languages that take different time. Arabic, I think, Mandarin and Korean. I think these are the 3 languages. Trainees are given, I think, 2 years to pass the language, as opposed to French, Spanish, German, which we have to pass in less than 1 year and a half, less than 18 months. But the promotion aspects are the same. So once they are confirmed, and even if you have been confirmed, so the whole batch is confirmed at the same time. Even if you have passed like before, once they pass, everybody gets confirmed in the service at the same time. So everybody starts off at the same level. There is no issue of seniority or juniority.
Is there anyone who has failed the exam?
Sorry?
Is there anyone who has failed the exam?
So it's a very difficult exam, and it is not. It is taken by a government in Delhi. So the paper goes in. We take the exam, and people fail the exam. And what happens is they take it again, and they pass it then. But without passing the language exam, you cannot be confirmed into service.
Got it. This is very helpful. And in terms of your experiences as the second secretary, how does a regular day look like? What are your daily responsibilities? How stressful it is? How stressful is it for your family if you are in a country that's not very safe for India? So how's it does a day look like for you as a second secretary?
So, as a second secretary, I would say that there are different responsibilities given to different officers, and it varies across the world. So, if you are, for example, a second secretary at the Embassy of India in Berlin, your work and your day in Berlin would look very different to a second secretary who's posted at the High Commission of India in Jamaica, or for that matter, if a person is, for example, posted in Syria or Iraq, his or her day would be, or work responsibilities would be completely different. So what happens at a small embassy or a small mission like we have at the High Commission in Jamaica, in Kingston, is that there is less of work specialization and you have to do a lot of things together. So because we are a small mission there, the officer is interested, for example, with the chancery responsibilities, which is running day-to-day administration of the High Commission, while also doing political work, that is reporting on political affairs in that country back to Delhi, sending political reports, or taking up political issues with the government, with the foreign ministry in the host country. And he or she may also be made to do commercial work and publicity work and consular work, because the embassy is, or the High Commission is small. Whereas if you are maybe at the Embassy of India in Washington DC, there would be, because also the volume of work is more, there could be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 officers only in the political department, or in the commercial department and in the consular department. So when you get into a small mission, you practically do everything every day, and there is nothing that you can say no to, because there is no second person to do that. But it also gives you exposure to a lot of things that you would not have had if you were in a larger mission. So I think work wise, I think whether you are like in any mission of around the world, in an Indian mission, you would have a lot of work, you would be busy all day. The nature of the work would be different. Also, in larger missions, what happens is that you get switched from one division to another. So you could be working in the political division maybe for an year, and the next year the ambassador or the High Commissioner or the Consul General CG would want you to work in the commercial division. So you get switched on to different divisions also. So,
and what does the hierarchy look like in the embassy versus the consulate, and what's the difference between the kind of work structure and stream that a diplomat might have in the embassy versus the consulate?
So a consulate is more some countries like which are important or very big to cover just by a single mission. What happens is that we have consulates too in addition to the embassies. So for example, in Berlin, we had our embassy in Berlin, while we had our consulate in Munich. We had it in Hamburg. We have it in Hamburg, and we have it in Frankfurt. The consulates mostly deal with the consular work, and they have geographical divisions, so they cover a certain area while also pursuing commercial work and also reporting on the local political work in the area. So but they are all the embassy in Berlin is basically heading all like all the consulates work fall under the embassy is our like main mission there, which has the responsibility for the whole country, but the work is divided among 2 or 3 different missions because the area of responsibility and the volume of work is more.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. And another thing that is concerning for many aspirants who are aiming for foreign services about the life of a spouse in the foreign services. My sense is that you're married, at least based on your WhatsApp picture. So a few days ago, I met the Indian ambassador here in Serbia, Sanjeev Kohli, and he told me that his wife was a practicing doctor, and because of the diplomatic journey that he had across, the Saudi Arabia and Iraq, so on and so forth, she decided to sacrifice on her medical career or medical journey. I'm sure, now things must have changed. The kind of careers the spouse can pursue has also changed. So what are the technical challenges or practical challenges that a spouse might face, and how easy or difficult is it to assuage those concerns for anyone who's aspiring for a career in foreign services?
I would say that the spouses of foreign service officers have to sacrifice a lot because foreign service officers keep moving all around the world throughout the length of their careers. So they would. So if you take any 10-year slot, if the foreign service officer has had 2 foreign postings and has lived in Delhi, he would practically have lived in 3 different regions across the world. The nature of postings differ. For just take my example, I was in India. I was in Berlin, where if, for example, the spouse is in the IT sector, he or she could easily find work. And then I was in Kingston, where there were not a lot of companies and the crime situation. And so finding work was difficult. To go with this is another technical aspect, because you have sort of bilateral agreements with countries, and the spouse is not allowed to work in every country that you are posted.
Oh.
So that has improved a lot in the last some years, because the Indian government has sort of pushed on this aspect, and now the spouses are allowed to work in a lot of countries. But that is also an issue that has to be considered. So what happens is the spouses, as I said, have to sacrifice a lot of time. They have to curtail their careers to be with the foreign service officer. And so, yeah, this is something that has to be accounted for before joining the service. However, having said that, I would say that if because of the COVID pandemic, there has been an acceleration in the work from home and using Zoom and digital tools to work. And that has sort of helped a lot. So I can give you an example of my wife. My wife was working from Jamaica online for an Indian company. And she's still working while she's in Washington, D.C., because she sort of has this online tool and the company allows that. So that has simplified matters a lot, because had this not been the case, she would not have worked whether in Kingston or in Washington, D.C. And then we would have to sort of think whether she should go back to India to pursue her career, because a gap in the career is, in the IT sector is also not good, or she should just leave the job and stay with me. So this has helped a lot, but this is something that has to be factored in before joining the service, because spouses do have to sacrifice a lot.
But I mean, on the brighter side, I think things are improving, and the way things were in the 40s and 50s and the 90s, that's not the case anymore. And with the emergence of work from home and various other ways you can launch your own startups or work in startups, work from home.
Another thing I would like to add is the foreign service officer has an ecosystem in which he or she sort of goes and naturally embeds into, because there is this whole ecosystem of the embassy or the high commission with all the other officers and the MEA officials and the local staff and everybody. And so, he or she spends 6 or 7 or 8 hours every day there. And so getting transplanted from A country and going to B country is not that painful, because there is already a ready-made social circle there. However, it is more difficult for spouses, because once they go into a new place, at least for the first 3, 4, 5 months, there are no relationships, there are no friends. And the spouse has to sort of work from scratch and build those relationships. So that is also something that becomes very difficult for spouses. The initial 3, 4, or 6 months, not only for the spouses, but even the children, to get acclimatized, to get adjusted to a new country for the first 6 months, or maybe for the first year. And then after getting adjusted, to just move again to a new country when all the relationships have sort of formed and matured for 3 years. So, and that's very painful too.
I think there's fun in that aspect. You get to be in challenging situations, and these challenges allow you to develop a lot of empathy while working with people from multiple geographies and the kind of globalized world that we live in. It's actually a blessing in disguise. That's how I look at it. Talking about spouse, I think someone told me that the most fun, if the father is in foreign services, your kid will have a lot of fun. You get to travel the world, you get to study in top-notch schools. So what is a diplobrat? A term, I think I stumbled upon this term a few days ago called diplobrat. What is diplobrat, and how is the life of a kid or kids in the foreign services?
Okay, Naman. So I can just tell you from second-hand experience, but like from whatever I have seen, the brats, as you call them, the kids of diplomats, not even diplomats, of all the MEA officials for that matter, because in this sense, our ministry is very liberal. It accords the same facilities to the son or daughter or the children of any MEA official who is serving abroad as is given to an Indian Foreign Service officer. So they get to study in the best schools in the country or in the city where they are posted. And it's all on the government, obviously. And they get a lot of exposure because they get to interact with a lot of international kids. They get to know the most exciting careers that are coming up much before than maybe their friends back in other places. They get to meet people like the top-notch people of that country along with their parents. So all that exposure is very helpful. These people have gone on to make very successful careers later. So I think they have a lot of exposure, a very comfortable life initially. But as I said, this issue of just remaining in a country for 3 years and just sort of moving from place to place and changing schools and changing friends along the way is sort of something that they have to develop skills to get used to.
Yeah, so if you were to have kids, they will hate you for initial years, but in the long run, they will love you because of the kind of exposure that they will be getting in because of your job. Another question that I stumble upon, and many people have asked me as well, is the difference between IFS-A versus IFS-B. What is that? And I don't think much has been spoken about it anywhere else. How are IFS-B recruited, and how is it different from the IFS-A?
So I am afraid I would not have like a lot of like specific knowledge on this thing, but IFSA is basically the Indian Foreign Service members for which are recruited from this combined UPSC examination, which selects the Indian Administrative Service, Indian Police Service, Revenue Service, all these officers. So that is what is IFSA. I'm guessing IFSB is another service or cadre in the MEA, as are different cadres of people who do the typing and so on and so forth. We have different cadres in the MEA. As far as I know, I think IFSB are selected through this SSC, which is a combined All India examination. And they also serve in Delhi. They also make the rank and file in Delhi as well as in our missions and posts abroad. And as I said, according to your experience, according to your place in the hierarchy, according to your specialization, and according to your performance, you like keep getting you are given different responsibilities, different tasks. So that's how it goes.
Got it. And do these IFAs also be holding the top tier diplomatic positions in years to come if they were to perform diligently well?
So I'm not sure if I'm completely correct, but if you go to a state, there are PCS officers and there are IS officers, and then there is this promotion, periodic promotion according to your like time in the service as well as your performance, and then you get promoted and become senior in the service or occupy more important positions. So that's how I think it works for IFSA and IFSB too. So if you are good enough, if you have performed well enough, why not? You can go even and occupy important positions in the service.
And what are the parameters on which the performance is gauged? And are there certain outcomes, outputs based on which the MEA will promote you, or is it just the tenure and time-based promotion in the foreign services?
So as in all the government services in India, it is time-based, and there is a certain path to your career. And if you are in the service long enough, obviously you'll be promoted in a certain way. But as is measured in different government services, your performance is evaluated by your immediate senior and then seconded by the second senior. And so the same method is applied in our service. Also, you have this yearly review that happens in all government services that we also go through. Apart from that, as in any government or any private service, your work speaks for you. So if you and we are a small service, so if you are working well, obviously people will get to know about that, and that's how basically you will be given an important portfolio or something that you like or something that you have specialization in. So that also works. The word of the mouth obviously also works as in any government or private service. And there is this formal evaluation process, yearly annual evaluation process, like in other government service too. So both, a combination of both.
Got it. So I think so many of the people who clear the IS exam, their dream is to become a collector. Uh, but for a diplomat, it is to become an ambassador. So how much time does it usually take to become an ambassador? And I'm assuming that there's going to be a ranking of a country based on which you will be given the ambassador status. So, for example, if a small state might it would be much easier, but I don't have much clarity. So, off to you and explain what how long does it take to become an ambassador?
So we have countries, the P5, for example, the US, China, France, UK, all these countries, where obviously the most senior and the best performing would become ambassadors. For example, our ambassador in the US is a secretary level officer. And then there are countries where young officers also get posted as ambassadors or high commissioners or even consul generals very early in the career. But I am guessing to become an ambassador or a high commissioner, even for a country that is like not a very with which India, let's say, has does not have very important or strategic relations. I think until you have served for a decade and a half in the service, I don't think you would be made an ambassador or a high commissioner. Unlike in the Indian administrative service, where you become a collector or a DM, as we call it, in 7 years, sometimes 8 or 9 or 10 years. I think you will have to, because it's a very serious job. You are basically you are representing your country in that country. Anything you say carries a lot of weight. You are interacting with the heads of states, the head of government, the foreign minister, or different ministers or secretaries in that country, and you are your top officer in that country. So at least a decade and a half, but that is not a given. That is not a given. Obviously, your performance, obviously, and for the most important countries, obviously the best and the most senior get those posts.
Makes sense. And is there any reason why it is called as ambassador and plenipotentiary? Why is that term plenipotentiary used, and what does it mean?
Oh, no, I'll have to check that up.
Okay.
I
Fantastic. So based on your journey in the foreign services so far, how long have you been part of the foreign services?
So I joined the foreign service. I'm of the 2017 batch. So my training started in August or September in Labasna. In December 17, we came to Delhi. 18, I went to Germany, Berlin, and 20, I joined in Jamaica. So I have completed 5 years into the service now, and now I'm on 2 years study break or study leave.
Yeah.
And so when I go back into the service after 2 years in 2024, I'll be 7 years into the service.
Phenomenal. And so, what is the eligibility to take the study break? And does MEA promote study breaks, or and do they even finance these study breaks? So, what's the entire methodology like there?
So, as regards financing, so if you are on a study leave, obviously the government helps you not with the uh, giving you the fees for the university as such, but obviously they help you with your salary and stuff like that in India, because you are a government officer at that time. The government has or the foreign ministry has taken a view that it is good to send foreign service officers to specialize in certain fields, to get academic exposure and to read more, to interact with other foreign service officers who are on study leave or study break. And I see this trend. This is like not a written thing, but obviously I am seeing this trend because a couple of years ago, somebody from the service went to Harvard, and he has completed his course and has returned back to service. They have given me the chance to study at Georgetown University. So this government is sort of promoting that. It does not pay your fees, but there are certain, I'm told that there are certain universities with which the foreign ministry or the external affairs ministry has a pact or an agreement, and if you go to those universities after doing a certain time in the service, so I think it is more than 7 years or 9 years, I don't know, I'm not completely sure, then it would be completely paid. So it's like an agreement between two countries. Apart from that, when if you are posted outside or you are in Delhi, the government sends you for, or the Ministry of External Affairs sends you for small training courses abroad. So it could send you to a European Union training course where you gain exposure to the European foreign policy, their history, how they think, interact with diplomats, top diplomats in the European system. So it could be a 1 month or a 3 month or a 15-day training course. When I was in Berlin, I was sent to a training course by the German Foreign Ministry, in which diplomats from different countries join. So the government tries to like give you as much exposure as possible, tries to send you to different study breaks and training courses. But it's also upon you to finalize and choose and see where you want to go or what you want to do. But the government is very helping at this point in time.
Wow, this is truly remarkable and incredible. Now, since you've been part of the diplomacy and now you're also a graduate student, do diplomats party a lot harder than the graduate students? So what's the, I mean, I think diplomats are infamous for throwing some lavish parties. So what's your take on that?
So there was a time when diplomat or what I heard about the foreign service, maybe of not only for India but of different countries, what was it is a service of wining and dining. But I think this has completely changed, at least for India, in the last 20, 30 or 40 years, where we do very substantial work while we are abroad. Obviously, throwing parties and being part of social events is a part and parcel of the service, because that is where you get to meet people, interact with people, make contacts, use those contacts later.
Yeah.
So I won't say a diplomat parties hard, but he or she doesn't avoid parties for sure. So if they get an invitation, you would surely find the diplomat attending parties, even if it is for a bit, even if it is for like a little time. But obviously, diplomats don't skip parties.
Makes sense, because I think networking is an essential component of the foreign services, and makes a lot of sense. And in terms of the political interference, so one of the reasons why people choose IFS or let's say the economic service or the revenue services, because in the IAS and the IPS especially, there's a lot of political interference, and that can be detrimental for the family life. How do you see that happening in the foreign services? Is it prevalent? And if yes, at what stage it is prevalent? And yeah.
So I am very junior to answer the question of political interference in foreign service. But from whatever I have heard or seen, negative, like political interference in a negative sense, I don't think prevails as far as Ministry of External Affairs or Foreign Service is concerned. Obviously, as part of the Ministry of External Affairs, our mandate is to implement the foreign policy objectives of the government of the day. So, and that is dictated. Obviously, it comes from the Prime Minister, flowing through the External Affairs Minister, through the Foreign Secretary, and then to us. So that is a that is a mandate, and this cannot be called obviously political interference. This is foreign policy, I would say, direction.
Makes sense.
Apart from that, I haven't come across any instance where my ambassador or my senior would have told me, or something has directly happened to me where I can attest to the fact that there is political interference. But there are some instances where you get to interact with, for example, members of parliaments or ministers, as happened during COVID crisis when I was posted in Kingston, and there were people who were stranded in Jamaica, in Bahamas, in Turks Caicos, in Cayman Islands. All these are territories accredited to the High Commission of India in Jamaica. And once in a while, you do get an email from a member of parliament saying that such and such person from my constituency is stuck in this, and see if you can help. And that is sort of a positive nudge rather than a political interference, I would say. But apart from that, I don't think I have come across any instance or heard about any instance where there has been a direct political interference in a negative way.
Wow, this is wonderful. And Pratik, based on your journey, 5 years into the services, what are the 5 highlights of your life ever since you became part of the foreign services? 5 highlights that you will never forget, and you might talk a lot about those highlights to your kids and all the family members. So, what are those 5 highlights that you cannot forget?
Okay, so I would say my first highlight would be my visit to Sri Lanka, because once you are like while you are getting trained, you are taken to an embassy or a high commission of India to just observe how the embassy or the high commission works. So I was fortunate to go to Colombo, meet the ambassador there, meet the DCM there, and the rest of the foreign service officers and the staff, and go around the country and see for myself the projects that India is implementing in Sri Lanka. And that was my first time, in fact, the first time in my life that I went outside India. And that was a very exciting thing for me. And the experience that I had in Colombo about how our mission works there was also very fruitful. So that would always remain a highlight for as long as I'm in the foreign service. The second would be my learning of the German language. So apart from Hindi and English, I had never attempted even to learn a third language. But that was a time when I pushed myself, learned this third language, which is German, which looked very hard for me at the start. But I think that after this 1.5 years of putting in labor, I think this is an additional tool or an additional skill that I have developed, and which I can boast of now. So that would also remain a highlight. That is also a highlight for me, and that has basically come to me because I'm a member of the foreign service. Another highlight would be during the COVID crisis, when a lot of people were stuck in Jamaica as well as in the accredited territories, to respond to them, and then eventually book 2 private flights to send them back to India. So we sent them back to India. Some of them went via London and then to Chennai. Some of them were sent through Curacao, which is another small Dutch island territory. From there to Amsterdam, and then to Delhi, to make sure that all COVID protocols are observed, to make sure that everybody has the money to buy their tickets, to make sure that everybody gets the visas. And so it was a lot of work, and it was very hectic, especially because it was the peak of the COVID crisis. But the satisfaction that everybody in the end reached their homes in India, everybody thanked us for what we did. That is something I'll never forget
Wow.
for the length of my career. So that is certainly one of the highlights too for me. Obviously, the national days, I cannot like take out one national day, but obviously the national days are a special thing once you are in a mission. Uh, the vibes that you get, the positive vibes, and the patriotic feeling that comes when you are part of the national day, the reading of out of the speech by the ambassador, that is something magical. And if you are if you happen to be around in a city where there is an Indian diplomatic post, you should make it a point to go to the flag hosting ceremony in the morning,
Yeah.
either on 15th of August or 26th of January, and you will not regret it. So that is obviously one of the highlights for me too. And then I would say getting the study leave to come and hone my skills to study at Georgetown University for 2 days. I don't think it would be as simple as it happened. It became for me because of my Ministry of External Affairs, because of the very willing administration there. If I was part of any other government department, because there is a lot of bureaucracy, lot of inertia. But I can say with confidence that the way our administration works back in Delhi, it's very hand-on, and it's something other departments or ministries can learn from.
Wow. That's wonderful. And the other thing that I want to speak of is the accommodation aspect of a diplomat. So, how does an accommodation look like for a diplomat, at least at the early stages, in Delhi or in later on as a third secretary and the second secretary? Because in comparison to their peers in the other services, there would be a lot of difference because those are capitals, and obviously per square foot value in the capitals is pretty high. So talk more about how a diplomat's house look like.
Okay, so as far as your accommodation abroad is concerned, the government or the ministry is very considerate to the fact that our diplomats should not look second to anybody in terms of housing. And the fact that if a diplomat is stressed psychologically about housing, about the kids' education, about how his or her family would adjust, he or she would not be able to focus on the like on his or her very important work for which
Yeah.
the person has been sent abroad. So the ministry has been very considerate in this regard, and the accommodations that we get when we are posted abroad is second to none, whether we compare it like with any foreign service, like with accommodation of any other foreign service officer that happens to live abroad. So in that sense, I think the Indian foreign service officers are very lucky. And obviously, as you go up the hierarchy, your sort of ceiling increases and you can get a bigger house or a better place to live. But even if you are a third secretary, you would have a very nice accommodation. And one of the reasons why like good you sort of get to choose a good accommodation is because of the earlier point that you mentioned, that you need to do a lot of social interactions, you need to invite people over, you need to entertain them.
Yeah.
And if the accommodation is not good, if the place is not good, obviously that would also suffer. But as far as living abroad is concerned, for diplomats or for any MEA official, I think the accommodations are comfortable. The administration, the MEA is very considerate of this fact. I'm not so sure when you come back to Delhi, especially at a junior level, but the inputs or the feedback that I'm getting is that a lot of things are moving in Delhi also. A lot of accommodations are being refurbished, either refurbished or being constructed. And in a couple of years, I think the situation in Delhi would improve.
Great. And how do the postings take place? I mean, do they throw you anywhere in the world, or do you have any preference in terms of where you want to go?
So obviously you are asked, there is this board that sits once in a while, and the number of postings all across the world that are vacant are put before you in a list, and then you have to choose your preferences. So you have, like with the language, or as it happens in the UPSC with the postings, you choose your postings. You tell the administration that this is where I want to go for. This is my first preference, second preference, third preference, and so on. But according to your utility, according to your, as I said, skill sets, your history, like the work you have already done, the board, which constitutes the most senior members of the foreign service, they sit and decide. And there is, as you said, you can be thrown anywhere in the world. Obviously, if the board decides that you are more valuable at a station X rather than a station Y, then you have to go to the place where they have chosen to send you.
Got it.
So,
And
but
whatever you are studying at Georgetown, will that be taken into consideration for your next posting in terms of skill
yes,
sets that you acquire and the specializations that you are focusing on? So all those
yeah,
things will.
yeah, obviously. So whatever I do at Georgetown, I'll have to go pitch, and I'll have to tell them that this is the specialization that I have attained, and if you think it is good enough, I should be given a posting that gels with what I have studied or the skills that I've acquired in the last 2 years. But it is obviously up to them. They are very senior people, and in their minds they will understand, or they will analyze my utility at a station A or station B, and that's how I'll be posted.
Got it.
But that is obviously taken account.
Got it. And the other thing is the story of a diplomatic passport. What is that? I know as government officers, almost everyone gets we all get the white passport, but diplomats have this very fancy red colored passport. What is it all about? And what are the perks, power, privileges, and who gets it? What is it all about?
So after like a certain seniority in the MEA, you get this diplomatic passport, which is the maroon passport. Before that, you get this official passport, and it is not exclusive to the MEA. Even joint secretary level officers and above, all across the government service, and secretaries and ministers and other people, eminent people whom the government chooses to give, they all get this diplomatic passports. And the privileges attached with diplomatic passports are so there are agreements between countries. For example, India has an agreement with Jamaica that you could enter that Jamaican diplomats would be allowed to with diplomatic passports obviously will be allowed to enter India without a visa, and vice versa for Indian diplomats. So there are some extra countries where Indian diplomats can enter without a visa, or they could get visa on arrival, for example, on a diplomatic passport. So this is one perk. It is basically a distinguishing feature. So if you are, for example, in a country and you have a diplomatic passport, obviously the government of officials there would understand that you are on a government mission, or your government has, and that you need to be treated in a certain way, and that's about it. That's how it goes. So it's more to do with the recognition that you are a representative of the host country and that you are at a certain level of seniority rather than anything else.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. And so when I was in Petroleum Ministry, I worked very closely with Binay Pradhan. He is currently, I think, the ambassador in Tanzania. I was speaking to him a few days ago, and based on what all I could gauge from this interaction, I realized that IFS officers are holding wonderful positions across the globe, but they also do deputations. When I met Binay Pradhan, he was in the Ministry of Petroleum, and he was doing incredible work there. So how do deputations work for the IFS officers? Do they can take deputations only in the central government, or can they also depute in the state governments and hold positions that a usual IS officer in those states might be holding?
Okay, so so we have the MEA has certain posts in different central like ministries, in other like ministries of the central government, where the MEA sends foreign services IFS officers for deputation. It is one of the ministries is the Petroleum Ministry, as you said. The other ministry would be the Ministry of Commerce. Then we send officers to the Ministry of Defense. The reason being that these ministries have a lot of international exposure. So, like as a petroleum ministry, the officials have to deal with foreign governments because petroleum or any other source of energy is not something that can be entirely produced, used, decided by India. What happens in the Middle East, what's happening, for example, between Russia and Ukraine, drives up the prices, drives up the availability of energy resources, and therefore it makes sense that a foreign service officer is sort of there to give advice or to take charge of the interactions with foreign parties. The same is with the Ministry of Defense and with the Ministry of Commerce. So there are like deputation postings for the foreign service officers. Similarly, in the security, the National Security Council Secretariat, the present deputy NSA is a foreign service officer. He was our ambassador in China, Vikram Misri sir. And as far as postings in the states are concerned, I don't know. I don't think that would be called deputation, but we have something called the regional passport offices in most of the states across India. And we do send representatives from the MEA to head these offices, including foreign service officers. So I know for a fact that my senior heads the RPO in Mumbai, Rajesh Gawande sir, who is a very popular foreign service officer. Similarly in Lucknow. And as far as deputation into the administration of state is concerned, I have heard, like, I think it is possible, but I don't have an example to give you as of now. But I think that is something that has happened before too. So we are all in the government machinery, and if the government of the day in the state allows, and if the MEA agrees, I think that is something that is possible too. But I don't have an example for that.
All right. Now tell me more about the attachments that took place when you were in the training phase. You know, the naval attachment, the attachment with the armed forces, so on and so forth. How exciting was it, and how fruitful was it for you?
So yeah, that's like a great learning curve and a very a time where there's a lot of excitement because you get exposed to a lot of new things. As far as I am concerned, after we joined the FSI, the SSIFS, that is the Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Service in Delhi in December, we were taken to, as I told you, Colombo, and we stayed there for a week. We went around the country, saw the development projects that the government of India is doing, got to meet the High Commissioner, got to meet the DCM, got briefings from different divisions about the work of the High Commission there. So that was like our the first thing or the first attachment that happened. After that, there is something called a Bharat Darshan, which is not exclusive to the Foreign Service. That happens in the IAS and the IPS in all the services. However, ours was cut short because we had like attachments to do in Delhi too. So you could sort of make the plans for the Bharat Darshan, and we went to Ladakh, and we went to Pangong So Lake, and we went and spoke to people from all shades and hues there, and then we went to Andaman and Nicobar. So that was very exciting to be with your colleagues, to travel all across India, and then we went to Thiruvananthapuram. After that, as far as Army, so there are three attachments: Army, Navy, and Air Force. But unfortunately, in our case, we could just do the Army attachment because, as I said, we had attachments to do in Delhi. So I went to Sikkim, and we interacted with the Army personnel there. We got to know the situation at the border there, and we got briefings, and so that was very enriching too. Once we were back in Delhi, we had this ASEAN India summit, which commemorated 25 years of the relationship between India and ASEAN. And so we were all attached and given different roles in that summit, and so I was attached, for example, with one ASEAN country, and I had to prepare briefs, and also I was involved with the logistical part of it. So that was our first exposure into the workings of the Ministry of External Affairs, and I found that very fruitful, seeing the actual heads of states and actual heads of governments for the first time with our eyes. So that was something special. After that, we also had the International Solar Alliance, in which more than 40 heads of states and governments descended in Delhi. They stayed there for 2, 3, 4 days, and then we had all these meetings at the Rashtrapati Bhavan. So I was attached to a country called Togo, which is in West Africa. And again, to meet the head of state of that country and the chief of protocol and the ministers, and to understand how they view India, and to enrich my knowledge about that country was also something that I cherish. So that was basically it. And then there are call-ons, the Honorable Rashtrapati Ji, the Honorable Prime Minister of India, the Honorable Foreign Minister of India, the Foreign Secretary. So all that happened. But from the starting point in December 2017, when I went into the institute, and when I came out in June, I think I became a lot richer in terms of experiences, in terms of exposure, in terms of experience. So once you complete that journey, you realize how much you have gone through and how much you have gained as a foreign service officer. So it was like our dreams to meet or to see the Honorable Rashtrapati Ji, for example, or the Honorable Prime Minister in person, or to meet different heads of state, to basically interact with them, to speak to them. And that is something, when that actually happens, you become a lot wiser, you become a lot experienced. So that really is something that I cherish.
Well, I absolutely love how the UPSC preparation phase ties up with the training phase and eventually with the job, where you begin with learning the history of India, the geography of India, and then you experience it and then you represent it. So I love it. Love the way how it's wonderfully architectured, and hats off to the DOPT UPSC for designing the entire thing. And one of the dreams of many newbies, at least, who are preparing and are thinking of a career in foreign services, is that they get to work with the UN or World Bank. I am aware of the fact that India has a permanent mission, and the kind of work that they do in the UN is starkly different from the UN sort of a work. But what's the kind of work that India does in the UN, and how can a diplomat become part of the UN? Is there an international deputation that they can participate in to be part of the World Bank or the UN?
Okay, so I would not be the right person to answer this, because obviously I have not done any postings at the permanent mission of India in New York. But with my limited knowledge, I know that there are different sort of committees at the UN, and we send the officers who are posted at the UN are given responsibilities of dealing with one of the committees that are operating at the United Nations. And so you do a lot of multilateral work there, and you specialize. For example, there is a committee on a certain region of Africa, and you have been working. You work there for an year or maybe 2 years and you specialize in that region. So I think it goes like that. But it is certainly the postings at the UN, the Indian mission in UN are certainly one of like the most prestigious ones, and the top notch officers of the Foreign Service get those postings. As far as deputations to the UN are concerned, I know for a fact that Nagaraj Naidu sir was the chief of staff of the UNGA president, who happened to be the foreign minister of Maldives for an year. And I think if we can call that deputation, it has just ended. So he was basically working with the UNGA president for a year as the chief de cabinet, as they call it. So I think it's possible, but how it happens or when it happens or who is sent up is something that I think would be dealt at a much senior level, and I would not be the right person to answer that. As far as World Bank and IMF are concerned, I don't think there is any Indian Foreign Service officer working on deputation to these agencies, but there are certainly lots of Indians as well as Indian origin people, the OCI, who work in the World Bank and the IMF. Geeta Gopinathan, who is the second in command at the IMF, is an OCI card holder, is an Indian origin person. And so are lots of economists and managers who work in the IMF and the World Bank. I can say that because I'm living in Washington, D.C. The headquarters for both are here. And I get to meet a lot of people who are there in both the agencies and who are either Indian passport holders, but mostly OCI card holders.
So now, last few questions, and this has been truly enriching. I think it's the treasure trove of information that not many people have access to. We've spoken at length about so many facets of the life in the foreign services, and hopefully this might reduce the information deficit that that many people have. So if, let's say, someone is confused between, while filling a DAF form, they're confused. Should I prefer IFS or IAS? What are 5-6 things they should keep in mind when they're opting for the IFS? And of course, you will have biases, and rightfully so. Why should someone choose IFS over the IAS? So that would be the perfect question for you then.
So, I won't nudge anybody to choose the foreign service over A service or B service, because the first thing I would say to an aspirant would be to just go with the passion of the person, because you have to spend the next 30 or 35 or 38 years of your life in a service. So if you make a wrong choice and you are not satisfied with that choice for the rest of your life, I think it would come down very hard on you, and you won't have a satisfactory or a happy life. So to be very careful and to fill your passion, and never to choose based on what a person A or your family or your friends are saying, to think why you have decided to take that examination in the first place, and whether you were motivated to go into the administrative service and make policies or policing or work in the revenue department, or did you want to work in the foreign service to forward India's foreign policy objectives. So that is a call that the person has to make based on his or her passion, and while being very clear that he or she would be responsible for his or her choice for the rest of their life. So this would be something I would say. As far as foreign service is concerned, I would say that you would have a lot of exposure. You would get to see the world. That would be one of the positives. The second would be your family would get a lot of opportunities abroad. Your children especially would get to study in good schools, would get a lot of exposure, a lot of career opportunities and options. You would have, as far as money is concerned, monetary wise, you would have a comfortable life. You wouldn't have to struggle in that regard. Obviously, if you like foreign policy work, I don't think there can be any other service or a career option that could be more exciting. But that is if you like foreign policy and international relations. The negatives would be obviously that you will have to stay away from your extended family or from your immediate family, like your father and mother, for extended periods of time. And that could be a negative. You will not get a chance to go into your district or your city or your village and work directly for the people there. So these would be some things that you have to sacrifice while in coming into the service, but you have to be very clear, as I said, and choose the service thinking that you will be responsible for the consequences that come out of it.
Makes sense, and very valid advice. And I think, especially regarding the 2 points, the first one is about just seeing the world. I think as IFS officers, you don't just see the world, you experience the world while living in top-notch cities with the leaders who would be shaping the context of the international affairs. And second, about the point that you mentioned about being away from the family. My sense is that MEA is very supportive um, in ensuring that you get to meet your parents. Uh, could be wrong, but is that a big challenge? Or we live in a world where you can travel from one part to the other in less than 24 hours with less than $1,000. So is that a big concern as of now?
So obviously, the means of communication have bettered as the world has become more globalized, and obviously there are more flights, cheaper flights for going from place A to place B. If you are, for example, I'm living in Washington. There is a direct flight from Washington, I think, Air India, that takes you to Delhi, and there are other flight options through New York and through other cities. So obviously, in that sense, a lot has improved. Even our MEA gives us the option of going back once in a while and all of that. That is all true, but still it is all relative, in the sense that if you are, for example, posted, if I were an Indian police service officer, for example, and I was posted somewhere in Uttar Pradesh, I would maybe visit my parents 6 times a year, as opposed living in Washington DC, where I would be able to meet them maybe once a year. Also giving the also during COVID, for example, I was posted in Kingston and I could not go home for 2 years, whereas if I had been in anywhere in India, I would have met my parents and my family many times in the year. And this period was particularly painful. Not like I speak for myself, but I think this experience would have been shared by a lot of people in the foreign service. Your parents get COVID in India, but you can do nothing. You can not go back, and you cannot help them, and you cannot take care. So all these things come up. All these very difficult circumstances do come up when you are in the foreign service, when you are living abroad. But you have to deal with that. Those are the sacrifices that you have to make, and when you sign up for the service, you have to basically keep all these things in mind. So circumstances do become very difficult once in a while.
I hope they're safe and in good health now, your parents. And I'm just curious, what was your parents' reaction when you chose IFS over the IAS or the IPS? They would have hated you, right?
No, surprisingly, they did not, because before I filled the DAF form, for the like 2 or 3 years before that, they had a very clear picture that I would, if I would be filling the UPSC form, I would be filling it for the foreign service. Also, the fact that my grandfather was my like most important advisor at that point in time, and he had lived through an era. He was a government officer in the provincial services in Uttar Pradesh, and he had lived through an era when foreign service officers were eulogized and as like larger than life, and forwarding India's interests abroad, as opposed to officers in other fields. So there were some names which were like very popular as far as foreign service is concerned. And so he had a perception that the best service in the world, forget about India, is the Indian foreign service. And so he sort of nudged me initially, saying that if you are thinking about foreign service, and if you are if you like to study about international relations and foreign policy, there is no stopping you. You should go for Indian foreign service. And that sort of eased me a lot, and removed a lot of social pressure from around me. So my family, my parents had a fair idea before I filled the form that I would be going in for the foreign service, and that I'm not in there for the administrative or the police or the revenue service.
Oh,
so that kind of.
And I concur with your grandfather. I think IFS is a lifestyle, and I'm so glad. Even though you're sacrificing a lot, but all thanks to your sacrifices that India is performing incredibly well across various disciplines in the entire world. And our current foreign minister has definitely made it cool to be in foreign services.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you so much for your time, Pratit. It was a pleasure to interact with you. And thank you so much for clearing all the doubts that many IFS aspirants will have. And I hope this video series on Money Heist nudges you to take decisions, not just by factoring and optimizing for money or privilege or power, but also about the lifestyle and the experiences and the relationships that you will build while being part of any career or any profession that you might choose. So good luck. Thank you so much, Pratit. And any last words for the audience?
No, I would first like to thank you, Naman, for inviting me on this forum and letting me speak to your audience. And I really enjoyed the program. It sort of took me back down the memory lane, and I sort of relived those last 5 years since I have joined the Indian Foreign Service. And to anybody, any aspirant who wants to join the Foreign Service, I would say it is certainly one of the best services in the world, if not just in India, but in the world. And you will enjoy your time and come with a commitment to serve the country. You would obviously have to make some sacrifices, but in the end, I think you will be satisfied and you will realize that it is worth it.
Beautiful. Good luck, Pratit, and look forward to meeting you and possibly meeting you in person. So good luck, take care, and stay safe.
Thank you, Naman. Stay safe.